you think we're watching in media in general? A lot of aging talent trying to appeal to the youngest demographic.
Yeah, I kept hearing from hosts, the younger generation is over Israel. I don't care if Gen Z turned on Israel. Why would that change the way that I feel about things or my values? What happens when nothing's taboo? Where do we go? Well, now Nick Fuentes jokes are mainstream. I'm online, I'm scrolling on X, I'm like, I don't know if this is real, and I don't want to have to become an investigative journalist to figure out if every single tweet and every single image and every single story that comes through my feed is real or not, and that is basically what we are asking the public to do.
How much time do you spend interacting with your audience?
I do come from the Joe Rogan school of internet, which is don't read the comments, post and ghost. Every once in a while I'll see a comment come through. And it was like biggest failed right-wing grifter, and I was like, ew.
Bridget Phetasy, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You have said that the algorithm is making hacks of us all.
Yes.
How is audience capture changing this new media movement that we've both been a part of?
So much, I think. And I'm sure it's changed me. I mean, I've said before that I know that I hear a lot from people going, what happened to you? Because I was Little Miss captain of the fence riding team for a long time, and I was liberal, and many people know my story, people who don't. I was very liberal. It was funny, the makeup artist asked me how I got into media, and I was like, geez, do you have like 5 hours? And it ended up being just such a strange, I was very politically homeless after I left the left and felt very disoriented. And honestly, I feel almost as disoriented right now as I did in 2017, 2018, when I felt very lost and like I didn't have a party that represented me. And everybody's heard these like, how I left the left, and all. It's almost a trope now. And then I came out and said I was voting for Trump, and people were like, oh, you've been captured by your audience. And perhaps that's true. I don't know that I would know if that was true or not, although a lot of people were very mad at me when I came out and said I voted for Trump in 2024. So I lost audience when that happened, but that's just the nature of, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody in media about this, and they were like, it's not that we have an audience, we just have people, and it's people who come and they go. And it was Konstantin Kisin and I were talking about this. Yeah. And I loved that, actually. I thought it was very thoughtful because I want to be allowed to grow. And in many ways, I have had to grow up kind of on camera. I got sober, started doing media, and then now it's been, and again, I make this joke on stage. If you had told me when I got sober that 10 years later I'd be a Texas suburban mom, I never would have quit drinking. I'd be dead of a fentanyl overdose now. And but I've grown and changed, and that's so much of what life is. So it's hard for me to figure out the boundaries of where does audience capture begin? Where does it end? All I know is that actually it was Ben Shapiro who, when I started listening to him many years ago, he would talk about values. And I was like, values? I mean, I knew what they were, but he'd say, what are your values? And I'm like, values? What are my values? So I think really thinking about what my values are and then being able to divorce them from some kind of person and ask myself, what version of the country do I want there to be in the future, and voting for someone who's going to back up more principles that I believe in or defend more of the things about this country that I think are great, as opposed to tearing it all down and starting from scratch. That's where I ended up landing. And I remember somebody said to me in one of my audience, they said, grow up and vote for whoever's going to leave you alone the most. And I was like, that's the easiest way to look at it, actually. Who's going to mind their own business and not mess with your life too much. So I think a lot about this, and I always start with myself. Have I been captured by my audience? Perhaps. Have I grown and evolved? Also, yes. Do I have different priorities than I did when I was single and living in Los Angeles and in my 20s and 30s than now in my later 40s and married and a child? So I think that we've all changed in media, but then there does seem to be a whole group of people that are just chasing clicks and will literally whore themselves out to the absolute worst people online and have no problem with that. And that's where I think that I don't look at my audience and see what they're saying and say, oh gosh, I've made a very wrong turn, because they're not all like, yeah, kill all the Jews or whatever. Like they're not racist. They're very reasonable, lovely people.
How much time do you spend actually interacting with your audience at Phetasy, on your Substack, in the comments?
That's a good question. I stay out of the comments generally. So the public facing stuff, I generally feel like what people perceive of me is none of my business. And this is a hard lesson I had to learn even in recovery when I got sober, because I was so worried about the way everybody thought of me, and I wanted to, you can't control it. And one of the things I've really realized being on X for far too long at this point is that there's so much projection happening. People are just, we are all projecting, but particularly people who aren't, who are just kind of passive bystanders and are watching they're not in the arena per se. I think they're spectators. They're definitely projecting a lot of stuff onto me that the more you see it, the more you're like, well, this is saying a lot more about you than it is about me. And I do spend time with my audience in Substack. So my Phetasy.com audience, it's now on Substack, but it's moved. I've been like at the front edge of, I was on Patreon, then I was on Locals, now I'm on Substack. So it has been the Wild West, and now our home base is there, and I have a paywalled like chat there, and I care what they say because they've been with me for a long time. I know some of them. We had a memorial during COVID for one of the guys who died. I used to do Zooms with them. I meet them at comedy shows. People who, it's not even just, and not even people who pay, but people who take, I believe everything, attention does. It's the most important thing you can give somebody, and it's time, which I feel is just our most important resource. So I'm so grateful for people who tend to take that time and engage in good faith. And I will engage with all those people. I want to know them. I like to know about their lives. I don't have as much time as I like anymore, but right now it's still, and even on Dumpster Fire, I'll go into the chat, which when we do the live premiere of the show, and we aren't doing it live. We just premiere the show live. And I love the chat. It's still like a magical place because we haven't hit that threshold where it's just all trolls and people coming in to be negative. It's actually mostly lovely people making jokes that I wish I had made on my own show. So I do come from the Joe Rogan school of internet, which is don't read the comments, post and ghost. Don't, I'll see people like fighting and battling in the comments. And sometimes people get in fights in my comments. And I'm like, don't do this. Don't spend your time doing this.
If you don't engage with the comments, the other way that you might be guilty of audience capture is just engaging in the analytics, right? That you are trying to build a successful business.
Yeah.
You have an obligation to build a successful business for all the reasons. I mean, you have responsibilities as an adult. You're a mother. You have a child you have to provide for. You have people who work for you who deserve to be paid. You have things that you want to say in the world because you want them to be heard.
Yeah.
For all of those reasons, your business goals matter. The analytics themselves, though, are always trying to drive you toward saying something or not saying something.
Oh, yeah.
How do you balance it?
So for years, I didn't look at the analytics because I'm an addict. And I know that I can chase analytics. I know that about myself. I know that I will put the results of my work before I put the work. And then that is dangerous for me because I don't want to become obsessed with chasing numbers, and it's like more and more and more. It activates that same addictive feeling in my body and mind that I know is just bad for me. And I also know, being a freelance artist, again, when we were having this conversation with your makeup artist, it just brought me back to being 19 and really just writing because I loved writing. It will take away from all of that. And I think becoming a writer and then talking about politics, it made me forget that I'm actually an artist. That is my priority. I love telling stories. My goal in all of this is to connect to people. That's always the goal. I love talking to everybody. I'm Irish. I have the gift of gab. I want to hear everyone's story on my airplane. I wish I could read people's minds and just know what they're thinking about at all time. If I had a superpower, that would be it. I want to know where they come from. The driver I had, he's living the dream, and he's got his family and his grandkids, and they all live here, and he talks about how they all spend time together. And I'm like, you're a rich man, and then we started talking about different struggles, and that's why I started Walk-Ins Welcome, my other podcast, was to just basically, I felt, as you've been pointing out in an amazing way on this show, that there was just an obsession with victimhood. Everybody was talking about victimhood, and even in the heterodox space and the right, it would become this conversation about victimhood instead of actually. And so I said, okay, let's put more of what we want into the world, which is stories of resilience, stories of how you overcome hardship, agency. And that's why I started that dumpster fire. I just felt like I was going insane, and I wanted to be like, hey guys, you're not alone, and we're all going crazy together. And that's what I have to remember, is that I have control over that. You and I, before we started shooting, we're talking about how I will write a monologue and I want to just be like, I don't care, whatever. And then I have to care.
You have to care.
I have to care. Analytics are interesting, though, because as a business owner, and somebody who now employs more than one person other than me, I was freelance for a long time, I do have a responsibility to pay attention to business things, those pesky business things. And once I started looking at analytics in a way with someone who understands business and in a way that was helpful to, okay, this is working and this isn't working. Sometimes I care and sometimes I don't. And we started making a joke out of it on Dumpster Fire. Sometimes it's just fuel for pointing out that something is funny. We had a format. The Democrats have a blank problem, and it worked. Every one of our dumpster fires that had that format. So then we just started making fun of it, and every single title for a while. We've gotten away from it now because I don't think it's funny anymore. But every single title is like, the Democrats have a demon problem or something like that. Yeah. And so there are ways to play with it too. But I think if you are driven by analytics, you end up, in a way, it's kind of like coming from the 90s and having everybody say, oh, you sold out. It's a little bit selling out your soul. We've never really, I will always just make what I want to make. And I think that as hard as that is, maybe I'm not as big as, I've seen a lot of people around me grow up, blow up, become multimillionaires. And sometimes I feel like I missed a boat, or I messed up, or I'm like the redheaded stepchild of that whole, somebody said most, what was a comment that I did see? Every once in a while I'll see a comment come through, and it was like biggest failed right-wing grifter. And I was like, ew, that one kind of stings.
That's merch.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll buy that t-shirt.
I should make it.
What responsibility do you think you have to your audience? I mean, people find our content, they engage with our content, and there is some sort of inherent promise. I mean, in what we say to them, right? You said project, and I think that's right. People project onto us an idea based on probably whatever they perceived about us when they first encountered us.
Right.
And they transact with us, they defend us.
Mm-hmm.
give us money.
Mm-hmm.
Do you owe them something for that?
I don't think I owe them anything other than to be truthful and honest as much as I have been. I think when I start getting away from the mission, which is for me connection, making people laugh, when I prioritize money and analytics, then I get in trouble and I betray my audience. And my audience, I've gone through another shedding because I've been making this joke, like, how am I more MAGA than MAGA? You know, when you look around, you're like, wait, why do I feel like more MAGA than a lot of the MAGA influencers who came before me and now they're all out? And maybe I've made many mistakes. I've been wrong about a lot of things. I've had to publicly admit those things and apologize to my audience for being wrong about things. But that's all I can do. That's all I owe them. I'm an artist. I'm a content creator, and I owe them that I am in good faith trying to process the world in real time as best as I possibly can with the information that I'm given and the information that I can even take in because of my own limitations. Yeah. And it's all been learning. You know, if I had it my way, I think I would probably, at this point, if suddenly I was given $10 million, I would just check out for 2 years and read and try and process the last decade, because I think the biggest problem I encounter is that it's the never-ending churn. Yeah. You know, you're always feeding the algorithm, and then you start getting like algorithmic dementia where you're just like, I was talking about this too. We just had somebody get sucked into a jet, you know, he got sucked into the airplane that had the guy who got sucked into the engine and died because he was walking across. It barely made a blip.
Right.
That seems like a big...
You think that's a story? Yeah, no story is a big story.
No story is a big story. It's all it's weirdly like a very unhealthy meditation. Nothing really sticks.
I think about the guy. We now know that the person who started the Palisades fire that destroyed Southern California was at least partially motivated by politics.
Yeah.
That you would think that would dominate the news for weeks.
No.
The average American will never even hear about it.
No.
Because it's moving so fast.
And I think people are definitely checking out.
Yeah.
I think they're just, I said this, I wrote a piece about this for Spectator about the dead internet theory, where with the introduction of AI, and I feel this more and more myself, where I'm online, I'm scrolling on X, I'm like, I don't know if this is real, and I don't want to have to become an investigative journalist to figure out if every single tweet and every single image and every single story that comes through my feed is real or not. And that is basically what we are asking the public to do. And they're all checking out or just going, you know what? Nothing's real. I'm a conspiracy theorist now, and I don't have to really believe anything. I think that's when people are talking about numbers down and they're seeing this, and I think people are just checking out. They're like, I don't want to have to have to do all this work. And they don't know where to turn either, because you don't have really who's the trusted news source that you have now.
Yeah, there's no authority. Yeah, I think about the audience question sometimes as a question of, is there an audience to get or is there an audience to create? And I think where a lot of people in our space get into a lot of trouble is they think that there is an audience, that the audience exists as a sort of fully
like
formed,
a mob.
Yeah, exactly. It's out there somewhere, and I've got to do the things that it wants so that it will come my way. I have to feed it so that it will come my way. And I tend to think of it, and you're very Gen X coded, so you'll probably see the world similarly, but I just tend to think, well, I'm going to do what I do, and I'm going to say what I say. And I think that because I think these things, and because I value these things, because I prioritize these things, probably a lot of other people do too. And so we'll find out.
Right.
They'll either coalesce around these things because it's of value to them or it resonates with them, or they won't. But I don't think that there is an audience, like a thing that just exists independently. And I've watched a lot of hosts. I mean, obviously, I've been in the space for a long time. I've helped cultivate, believe it or not, I've helped cultivate a lot of successful and some unsuccessful talent too in the space. And I've watched how different talent reacts to the audience or the idea of the audience, and how they can become very fearful
Yeah.
of the audience. And I've never really been fearful of the audience. And I think this reflects in my politics. I say all the time, I'm a lowercase r Republican, that I live in the tension of trying to both represent and lead.
Right.
I think that the premise of a republic is that representative governors both represent and lead the people. They don't, it's not populism. You don't just give the people what they want or say that the people are always right, because the people aren't always right. The smartest person, as soon as they become part of people, actually becomes dumber, because there's a reason we have a word for them called mob or crowd, that we surrender some central and important part of ourselves when we group together.
Mm-hmm. But it's also like you do it on a biochemical level too. They've done a lot of science around this. You also just, not only do you surrender some part of yourself, I think you literally do, and you become part of this weird groupthink.
Right. But it's not elitist either, right? Because our job isn't just to make people do the things that they're against, or make people do it. And so as what's true for me philosophically with my politics is also sort of a governing philosophy for how I create art, or how I create content, or how I talk to the audience, which is all the same. I'm sort of aware. I think I do have some obligations to the people who've transacted with me.
Yeah.
Not to take them for granted.
Yeah.
Not to sort of throw their values back in their face or something, or disregard them. But what I don't owe them is agreeing with them.
Right.
What I don't owe them is never challenging them. And in fact, I do owe them challenging them. I owe them being, I loved your word, just being honest, like being truthful. And sometimes that's going to upset them. And sometimes they may stop being part of your audience as a result of it. I would see it a lot in, like, I make a razor commercial and I get in trouble because all the women have like deep V cut.
Right.
And my audience is fairly conservative, and they would come back and say, we thought this was and I'll say, well, if you thought that, like, if you thought that I primarily make family entertainment, you didn't think it because I told you that.
Right.
That's not how I prioritize. Like, I'm trying to make something that I think carries a piece of truth, or is resonant, or is funny, or, whatever my motivation is. I'm not making pornography. I'm not flaunting your values or the difference between our values. I'm aware that there's a relationship that we have, but there's tension in the relationship too.
Right.
There are times where I think that an artistic choice is important for whatever reason, or a political choice is important for every reason. And I think that it's good that we have that tension in the relationship. But it's probably also fair to say that I thought all of that having a slightly different relationship to the audience than what the hosts on my network might have had. Or what I have now, I guess, trying to do this new, my new life of trying to be a lowly podcast host.
It's not easy on these mean streets, is it?
It's not easy on these mean streets.
It's not easy. But I wonder what insight that's given you, being kind of an independent. You're like an independent record label now, and I always joke, I'm like, we're like the last independent record label on the block here. It's not. It is. It's one thing when you have kind of a machine behind you, you have resources, you've got a network, and the network effect is very helpful. But when you're just all on your own, it's very much, it is very much like those indie record days, where you've got to do your own marketing, and you've got to do.
And you only get to eat what you kill.
Yep, this is exactly what I said last night. I've been doing this now since I was basically 19 years old, freelance. And I think it's a different mentality, although I think it is a mentality everybody should get more comfortable with as we move into this new world we're headed into with AI and whatnot. I'm very used to you only eat what you kill, and therefore you are always hunting to a certain extent. You have to be kind of looking for new opportunities, having different conversations, finding different audience. And I don't put money into marketing my stuff online and putting, ads on Facebook and all of these places. And I think that obviously seems to help people. And I would just rather invest in other people who are artists and help them maintain their own creativity and dignity in life and provide for their families and themselves. But there is a certain amount of having to feed the algorithm and market that I'm not sure, but I do wonder, is it even effective anymore?
Well, there's so much there. I mean, first, you have this real Gen X sensibility, and some people wear their generational predispositions on their sleeve, and you are among those people. I wonder if your fear of selling out prevents you from joining teams, if it makes it hard for you to participate in the sort of benefits of network life.
I would join a network. I think if there was, I've had shows with Two Way, for instance, and I think that I don't resist it, but it would have to be worth it because there would have to be like a glow. I would have to be able to get a glow up from it, I would, and have support, because what I have learned from doing this and being on networks and being on podcast stations and whatnot is that lots of people promise you that they can market and that they can do all this stuff for you, and they don't do anything really. And if you don't blow up instantly the way that they thought or wanted you to blow up, they kind of give up on you and they focus on whatever they think is the next big thing. And it takes time, as you know, it takes time and energy and effort. And but I am very much like, and I do wonder if it's because we all grew up with Field of Dreams. We just have like, if you build it, they will come.
I think that's the worst line ever put in a movie.
Like, will they though? How are they even going to know it's there?
It's the worst line ever put in a movie, and it poisoned a generation of
probably mine
entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Because it's not true that if you build it, they will come. You have to build it, and then you have to tell people about it.
Yeah.
And then you have to refine it.
Yeah.
And you have to adapt constantly.
You need signs so people know where it is.
You need signs so people know where it is.
You need a billboard.
It is true, having worked alongside a lot of talent who went on to do really big things. It is true that the talent who make it are the talent who do, not who wait.
Mm-hmm.
So the talent who wait for the network to do for them never make it. The talent who join the network and do make it. But with that said, with very few exceptions, I think most of the talent who made it, for example, at the Daily Wire, are both the kind of people who would have made it without the Daily Wire,
Yep,
and didn't make it without the Daily Wire.
Interesting.
And so, like, the power of the network was really important. And Matt Walsh is kind of an interesting example of this, because Matt is a doer. Mm-hmm. He's the kind of guy who's going to make it. He's never satisfied. He is always thinking about the next thing. The worst time to be around Matt Walsh is after a success, not after a failure, because success just raises the bar, and now the next success is demanded. You have to find a way to stretch again. You make one successful movie, now I've got to make a successful trilogy. Like, you're always just like skipping ahead to the next big thing. And so on one hand, you could say, well, Daily Wire could hire 100 people and never get another Matt Walsh, and that's true. At the same time, Matt Walsh had a show for the Daily Wire for a long time, and until he moved to Nashville, where he could engage directly with the team, directly with the network, his show didn't really work. And so I take that as a way of saying, well, the network is a huge part of what helped Matt Walsh to succeed. Maybe it's a little like Alcoholics Anonymous in that, the percentage of people in Alcoholics Anonymous who stay sober is almost, or who get sober, is almost indistinguishable from the percent of people who get sober without Alcoholics Anonymous. And yet, Alcoholics Anonymous was the definitive tool for the people who got sober inside Alcoholics Anonymous. So both things end up being true. There's a percentage of people who are going to do it, and then there are the tools that those people are able to avail themselves of. Maybe the same person, if they had gone to a different program, is also in that small percentage. Maybe if Matt Walsh had gone to a different network, he would have found the tools that he needed. Maybe if he'd been required to do it completely on his own, he would have found the tools that he needed. I suspect that's true.
Right.
But That's not what happened. What happened is these tools, and you can see as he moved closer and closer to the network, even geographically, and was able to avail himself more and more directly of those tools, he was able to succeed at a much higher level than he had
Yes.
been succeeding previously. And that, I think that's what you get out of the network, is just a bunch of tools that you wouldn't have otherwise had, a bunch of perspectives you wouldn't have otherwise had, some resources, financial, that you wouldn't have otherwise had. But a network, especially not now. It was different when networks were linear. I mean, if when Tucker Carlson left Fox, they had given me his show, I would have had 2 million people a night. I might not have
Right.
had the 4 million people a night that he was getting, but I would have had 2, just because the network was linear. People who had tuned in for the 5 o'clock hour stick around for the 6 o'clock hour. That doesn't apply here. In this world, Daily Wire can hire 100 hosts who aren't going to make it. You still have to be the person who has agency,
Right.
takes initiative.
I think it depends on the network too, because the networks that I have been involved with either were just so corporate and big that they were just hoping that you would come in and you would do your own thing without very much help or a real understanding, I think, of new media. They were in podcasting, but not in new media, which is I don't know really how to make that distinction other than it was very corporate and they had these shows, and they were kind of like true crime, and it was just, but not really occupying much of the space that I occupied.
And not talent development.
Not talent development. And then another place where I went, where I loved the show I was doing there, they just didn't know how to support me. And then it ended up being me having a show that I was starting from scratch all by myself. And I'm like, I don't need this. If I'm going to start a show I'm happy to start a show from scratch with a network if they're going to support me. Megyn Kelly's a great example of this. She has incubated a lot of talent that's doing very well because they know what they're doing at their network in terms of supporting talent and how to put out clips and do the basic marketing things that are required to help a new baby channel, new show grow. And I didn't have that support. And then it just ends up, I don't see it as a failure because I have the IP and I love the show. It was my Real America show. It was live. I loved talking to my audience. I really don't like live streams unless they have a frame around them.
Yeah.
It's like improv to me. I cannot stand free floating live streams where you're just like, I'm going to just get on here and talk. It feels like a waste of everyone's time. But if there's a frame around it, if you're doing, you guys do the group, that's live, right?
It's live.
That's fun. It's a little bit like, we don't know what they're going to say. And it's live. And Real America was very much like I did a monologue. I had guests come on and then we would hear from the audience. And I'm one of those people that actually does like hearing from just random, like it was a little bit like the old radio shows where you'd have the guests call in. Yeah. And I absolutely love that. But it wasn't really growing and I didn't feel like I had the support. And so I just called it, even though it was great and I love the idea, and I'd actually love to take that idea on the road. That's a show I would do on the road before an election. I'm like, this is a show you should do. You should take this out. You should go to literal diners all over America because they're always talking about that mythological like diner voter.
Yeah, the diner voter.
Yeah. And go out and interview people and, the summer before an election and just take the temperature of America, and it would be amazing. And people have resources, why aren't we? This is what I would do if I had resources. So I think ultimately I would want to be my own network, or get together with somebody. I mean, because I've talked to you about the scripted ideas for stuff that I have, which is still something I'm working on and something I will never let die. And you did something so ambitious for the Pendragon cycles that I thought was very brave of you, not to use a word that's been destroyed, but because I know what it takes to try and put something like that on. And it is this was one of my biggest criticisms as someone who came from the left into the center, heterodox, and then new media. Everybody would be complaining always about the left-wing media. And it's like, okay, well, make your own stuff then. And you actually did that. And I loved it. I mean, I was talking to Spencer. He made up a language. I mean, it's so ambitious. And I really have realized, too, that I think most of Hollywood is like a vanity project that loses money. So because they're trying to get their ideas and their stories, and they value art and artistry in a way that I don't see on the conservative side. And I don't know why that is. Why do you think this is?
Well, throughout all of human history, art has been subsidized by the wealthy.
Yes.
And that you come to America and we've made pop art. We've found a way to apply the principles of the market to artistic endeavors, for good and for ill. It's given us some unbelievable pop culture. But it also made us subject to all of the same things that affect every widget factory, that international distribution.
Right.
And international distribution means that over time you get international funding for your projects in advance, which in time means that you're making things that are no longer even for your own culture. Now you're producing pop culture that isn't even reflective of your culture, but there's a cause and effect to all art, especially when you have hegemony the way that Hollywood did for so long, to where you're both reacting to and creating culture in real time. And so now you're making culture that isn't for your culture, but it's becoming your culture. So if you look at the history of Hollywood, in the second half of the 20th century, we exported American values around the world by way of Hollywood.
Right.
And by the early 2000s, we were importing the values of the world into America by way of Hollywood because of that market structure that we had created. And on the right, sadly, a lot of the people with a lot of money on the right are disinterested in culture. And so they don't understand why they would need to subsidize it in any way. And plus, you see movie stars flying around on private jets. Well, that doesn't need to be subsidized. That's a business.
Right.
And so not that every rich guy on the right hasn't lost money on a movie, because every rich guy everywhere has lost some money on a movie. But there isn't the kind of patron in American cultural art that there has been throughout history and every other culture's dominant art forms. There aren't people who are just willing to lose money for the sake of participating in the creation of culture-affirming and culture-shaping content. And so I do think it's in the tension of bringing market forces to bear on the medium that we've created a problem that we don't know how to solve.
I will say, though, as someone who's done media now for a while, conservative media just doesn't pay as well either. So they're just not, it doesn't, you want good talent, you have to pay for it. This is often why people, you hear this a lot, but it does seem like, why would I risk going to a network if it was a conservative network, for example? And I'm not saying this necessarily about the Daily Wire, just in other networks. They can't offer me much more than what I can make on my own at the end of the day. Maybe it's a little bit more stable, but are you going to grow? Are you going to... I look at some of the places that have insane resources and insane, like, they could do entire TV shows and sets because they're like the Blaze, for example. They should be making like the next Roseanne, Why are we only making like culture war stuff all the time?
Well, in a way, it's because it's what the audience will accept from us. One of the challenges, as a guy who did go off and try to make a lot of...
You just said the audience, they need to know that they want this from you. Yeah. Maybe they don't know they want this from you.
Well, I agree. And this is why one of the things I'm most proud of from my tenure at Daily Wire is that we were always ambitious. We tried a lot of artistic, for something that was fundamentally a news company in the beginning, we made a lot of artistic content over the last, starting really in 2020 when we brought on Dallas Saunier to help us build out our film division.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it worked and some of it didn't.
Yeah.
But all of it, every time you had to say to the audience why you were doing it. You had to take them on a journey with you because they didn't just instinctively want it from you.
Right.
And so a huge part of, back to if you build it, they will come. It wasn't just marketing it the way you would market a movie in Hollywood. People know they want to go to the movies or they know they want to stream a movie, and you're competing for attention within that ecosystem of things that they're going to watch. It's 6 p.m. I'm going to watch something with my wife. What's it going to be or whatever? But when a conservative media company engages in that, you have to tell the audience first why it even needs to exist. And you have to bring them along on the journey of doing that. And when we did that, we most often succeeded. And when we would lose sight of that, we would most often not succeed. And that's just it's a generational project.
It is,
You can't just assume that you can compete with a multi-$100 billion infrastructure like Hollywood has built over a century and a half, and that we're suddenly going to make a movie and have completely created alternatives to that.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of financial risk involved in it. There's going to be and therefore a lot of need for creative talent, ambitious operators, and moneyed interests who understand why it's important to take those risks and even absorb some of those failures over time.
Oh, it's crazy. When you list, so because of a project I'm working on, I've been going back through listening to like the history of late night and studying it in a way that I never really have. And the amount of time that they gave these guys to find their voice, it's crazy. All of them. Every single one of them. Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel. They were like, oh, give him time. He'll find his voice. I mean, you would be off. And it's maybe more true just because of the internet and how quickly things take. But they had a lot of time to find Conan. They had time to develop their show, their voice. And then even when you were listening to kind of the battle between Letterman and Leno, these guys were willing to sacrifice millions of dollars to get this talent, and it wasn't, they understood they might be dealing with a loss, or they were making these calculations. The guys who were in the head of the networks, they were making the calculations of, okay, well, we might have to pay Leno out, but then we'll get Letterman. And it wasn't something that the left wasn't calculating and building this kind of empire that they've built. They've taken a lot of risk and lost a lot of money in their endeavors. I don't know that they even make money anymore. Does anyone make money in entertainment?
It's very hard to know where to make money in the economy today, anywhere, but especially in entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So you've written this piece, which is listen. You're many things in media, right? You're a writer,
Too many things.
A comedian, you're a show host, but I think of you primarily as a writer. When I think about all of the things, when I think about the moments where your work has impacted me the most over the years, it's almost always your writing that does it. You're an amazing writer, and you've written, I think, sort of two definitive pieces. Your piece on regret from 2022 was obviously a transformational piece in the national conversation, I think in your own career, in the lives of many, many people. I think this piece you've written recently about not caring what Gen Z thinks about you is a part of that same body of work and will be a part of that same legacy. In fact, I think there's actually ways in which they're the same piece, which would be fun to talk about. But
go for it.
But fundamentally, you're saying that you think we're watching on the right in particular. No, that's not fair. We're watching in media in general. A lot of aging talent trying to appeal to the youngest demographic.
Yeah.
And that's what audience capture looks like in our space today. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was looking around and I kept hearing from hosts, the younger generation is over Israel. I kept hearing this from hosts. And I'm like, well, do you have influence or not? So you say you're an influential person. You are supposed to be this person that has a huge media company or show and would be considered a pundit or an influencer or whatever word you want to use for it. And now you're telling me over and over again, oh, Gen Z's turned on Israel. Well, that Gen Z's over Israel. Okay. And what does that mean? So you're just going to follow them? Because you're basically telling me you have no influence, they're not listening to you, and you're going to follow them because they've turned away from Israel. Let's just use Israel for example. You could say Trump, you could say whatever. Israel is the dominant one that seems to keep coming up. I don't care if Gen Z turned on Israel. Why would that change the way that I feel about things or my values? Or why would that change the way that I mean, all of these people basically announced that they were going to change their mind about Israel beforehand just by saying, well, Gen Z's turned on Israel. Don't you know after the demographic under 40, after it is gone, they're done with Israel. All right. Why am I supposed to? So you're just telling me that you're just trying to chase that younger audience. And that's when I wrote the piece where I was like, leave me behind. If I have to do this, whatever this is, this like, it reminds me of that meme, like, how do you do, Gen Z? You know, here I am hating Israel. Am I one of you now? It was just yuck. And it turned me off from a lot of people that I had formerly really respected, and I felt like they were people who stood their ground at times when they were taking hits, and now they will say they're standing their ground again while they're taking hits and everybody's coming after them. But the dominant left, right, and center, everybody's going in the same direction on Israel. Like, you're not some brave truth teller for joining the left, the far left, and all of academia and whatever they've been saying, and most of the Muslim world, and you know, the new right or whatever, and the Nazis for hating Israel. Oh wow, you're so brave. You're literally just going in the direction of the entire crowd of the world.
I have a buddy who's like very much into the Enneagram, and he's an 8, which is the contrarian, right? The challenger. And he's Gen X. And he listens to Tucker Carlson and has changed his position on Israel lately. And I think I really pissed him off one day because I said, bro, you're an 8, be an 8. That's not very 8 of you to suddenly, you know, as James Lindsay says, like if you've suddenly discovered that you dislike Israel, you've fallen for a huge psyop. And it's obviously true. It's a complete, I think the term you used in your piece is it's the weather vane right now for seeing. But one of the things you mentioned in the piece I thought was so interesting because it transcends the Israel issue is you said that Jon Stewart and Tucker Carlson are the same.
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing. You took from Jon Stewart's talking to Mamdani on his show, and then Tucker Carlson talking to Nick Fuentes on his, and you saw the same phenomenon taking place both left and right, which is chasing the in-vogue demographic.
It's so weird. And maybe it's because we came from like a culture of neglect. You know, I was thinking about like what I was like, the boomers didn't give a like, they did not care about what we thought. They thought, I remember the boomers being like, you guys are idiots. We were idiots too once. Now we're boomers. Like, yeah, we were showing our boobs and burning our bras, and now we're working in corporate, and like they just didn't seem to respect anything. They saw us as young and rebellious, but they weren't chasing our affection and I was joking with my friend the other day. I'm like, it's probably because we were all neglected, you know, like the divorced kids. They just weren't caring about us at all. But this new weird chasing of approval from people younger than you, it's not that I don't feel like they have insight or knowledge or something that I can learn from them. I'm not saying, I'm better than you and I know more and I'm older. There's obviously, I think I can learn from anyone at all times. And most people. And it's mostly just that chasing of approval and chasing that audience that I just don't think that they're all kind of doing it, and they're not, and you're giving into these instincts that I think are very on the left. You have Mamdani and this kind of socialism, and Hasan and all these people that they're courting the favor of, and on the left it doesn't matter because there's no such thing as too far left. So there's no one stopping them, really. No one saying, hey, some people will try, but they'll do it in a way they don't really care. On the right, I think at least there's some pushback when you go too far right. And then the contrarian people will be like, oh, what? I can't talk to anybody. I can't. And I understand. Look, I understand all of this because we just came from the wokeism. And I think wokeism plus COVID just broke, everyone's destroyed. And so they're just chasing audience because it's the only relevant metric that you have anymore of whether or not your influence is the currency. It's like in the attention economy.
Has the zeitgeist, though, always been created by the youngest demographic? I mean,
sure. I mean, I think even listening to the history of late night, and I think a lot it's interesting because these people came from network television where it was all about your ratings. You were obsessed with your ratings. And even listening to the late night stuff, it was these people lived in constant crippling fear that they were going to be canceled all the time, and they were always comparing their ratings to everybody else, and it was always like, well, Letterman gets the 18 to 29 demographic, and that's where all the ad dollars were going, and everybody was chasing. So I think that's very built into our culture, is to chase the younger demographic and the younger advertising people because they're trying to get those long-term customers. If you catch somebody in their 20s, they're likely to stay with your brand. All of this stuff that we've learned now from marketing, even though I think it's more likely that, Gen X, elder millennials, and boomers just have more money. Yeah. But it's the young girls who get money from their parents and they spend it on the makeup stuff. And so I think, yes, but I also think we have elevated the youth culture in a way in the past 30 years that was not always the case.
Yeah, I'm a basic boomer at heart, right? Like all of my tastes are like completely basic boomer tastes. And so
you love like World War II.
Yeah, exactly. I spend a disproportionate amount of time thinking about Don Henley. And I was thinking this morning about Don Henley and how in his later part of his career, he's written some of the best songs that he's ever written. He wrote this song called Waiting in the Weeds that's on Long Road Out of Eden, which was an Eagles album that is so sort of out of the zeitgeist that even if you went and saw the history of the Eagles tour, they didn't play any songs from this album. And then he made this album much later in life called Cass County, and he wrote this song. Well, there's so much great writing on it, but in particular, there's like the most quintessentially Don Henley song called Train in the Distance, which is in the tradition of Train in the Distance songs and has all these like Frostian reference allusions, which are very sort of Henley-esque. And so I've reflected on it. You hear these two great songs, and no one will ever get to hear Don Henley play them live because they're not part of the zeitgeist, and because he carries on his shoulder the burden of all those songs that he wrote between 1972 and 1985. Like, you have to play all of them.
Yeah.
And if you play anything else, you decided not to play one of them, and that's a fail. And there's so much wisdom to be gained from thinking about this and the burden of success. And but in particular, I thought about the fact that, he wrote Waiting in the Weeds in his late 50s, I guess, and he wrote probably Train in the Distance in his late 60s or even early 70s. And you go, well, yeah, he can't create the zeitgeist now. If you think about why were the Eagles successful, or why were the Beatles successful? You listen to the Beatles albums in order, and not a single one of them is the same. Mm-hmm. You listen to the Eagles albums in order, you go from country rock to disco to rock anthem. And it's because they were never trying to be the Eagles.
Right.
The Beatles were never trying to be the Beatles. They weren't trying to figure out, like, what did the Beatles sound like? Well,
Right.
now let's go make that. They were always both reacting to and driving the zeitgeist, which you can only do from within, and which you can probably only do in your 20s and early 30s. You know, that's when you're both malleable enough and at the edge of that wave enough. And I think that's good. I actually think that's how it should be.
Right.
I think Don Henley's best writing should only be known to old farts who aren't part of the zeitgeist.
Right.
And that his most important writing, his most influential writing, should be from his 20s when he was creating the zeitgeist. And young people should lean left. I don't know that every young person needs to be a blue hair crazy. I think that the left has become so unconstrained,
Right.
and its excess is so embraced and hegemonic that it is anomalous now. No one should ever be far left. But young people should lean left. They should be center left. And as they grow older, they should move to the right, because you move to the right through wisdom and experience. But as you move to the right, you also stop being zeitgeisty. You know, no one wants to see a 40-year-old in bell bottoms, not even in 1969, 1972. Like, you don't want to see that. You know, that it's a bad look. It's pick me energy, I think, to use the language from your piece. But it's good that young people are doing that, and that should have an impact. And instead of us trying to reach these Gen Z guys and change them, in a way, we should be building a better world for them to inherit and waiting for them.
Right.
And in that way, maybe the anti-Semitism stuff, as horrible as it is, aberrant, evil, demonic, I have spiritual beliefs about it, like, it's terrible.
Yeah.
If all it is that plus 2026 bell bottoms, then you go, all right, you dummies. Life is going to disabuse you of that.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're going to be here waiting for you in the real world when you come out the other side of this fever.
Yeah.
It becomes more than zeitgeisty. It becomes dangerous when Tucker Carlson and Candace and actual people in elected office, Thomas Massie, there's not a single person who calls me a Jew on Twitter that Thomas Massie doesn't follow on Twitter. That's bad.
Right.
Because in other words, I guess what I'm probably ultimately saying is that when we try to become them, we have the money and the power.
Yeah.
So when we go trying to get them to pick us, we actually become worse. They don't become better.
Right.
The history of the world is supposed to be that we start off young, dumb, stupid, reckless, and we create culture.
Yeah.
And we feel things very, when I listen to new music, it doesn't affect me the way listening to old music does.
Yeah.
Why? Because I'm not young and stupid anymore. And I don't believe in love the way that I believed in love when I was 21. And that's good.
They've also done studies that a lot of the music that you take in your teen years is the music that it's like set in your brain forever.
Forever. But yes, of course, part of that's nostalgia, part of it's biological, but part of it's just belief.
Right.
You're more utopianist, you're more idealist, you feel things more deeply, you want to just have a good cry, whatever it is when you're in your teens and 20s, and that's good. You should have rock and roll for that or whatever. And then the old farts should be sitting over here waiting for us to get to them. Like, oh, you're going to get married, and you're going to have kids, and you're going to pay taxes, and you're going to eventually graduate over into these better ideas. Prolonging youth, arresting development in youth, as we've done. As Joel Berry mentioned, keeping people on their parents' insurance until they're 26 years old. All the things that we do now to make youth a permanent state.
Yeah.
And Tucker and on the right and Jon Stewart on the left trying to, hello my fellow kids or whatever that shimmy meme is. The combination of those two things, though, turns the horrible ideas of youth into the governing philosophy of the country. And that's the thing that I'm actually afraid of in the moment that we live in.
I know, because my general feeling was what you articulated was that, oh, these kids will just kind of grow out of it. I'm like, okay, I understand it because it's kind of like the only third rail. There's not many anymore. There was wokeism, which was everybody was self-censoring. Everybody pushed back. Comedians held the line. Then I was like, and this was an interesting moment for me. And I asked this question in 2024. What happens when nothing's taboo? Where do we go? Well, now Nick Fuentes jokes are mainstream.
That's right.
Because that was the like third rail, and he was banished for his jokes and talks and whatnot. And now you see a lot of this in entertainment and media, and and because people have been so like contrarian brained that they now think anything that anyone pushes back against you means it's the thing that is true.
You're over the target.
That's insane. And this was something that I had to be very careful of, and I was hyper aware of it coming out of the left was, am I self-radicalizing because I'm being rejected? My peers are rejecting me. I'm very aware that is a very hard thing to endure psychologically. And am I just becoming more radical because people that were my peers and my friends are now rejecting me? And so I'm just self-radicalizing. And so I always had to try and be aware of how much of that rejection I was feeling and how much of that was turning into resentment. And thank God I had a program that allowed me to navigate this spiritually. Because I felt like I definitely had moments where it was like, well, F you, I'm just gonna, I don't know, I can see how you would end up in a cul-de-sac that you can't get out of. And I think that's now because it's so many things. I mean, I spend too much time thinking about this. And it's so many different forces that are influencing each other all at the same time. I think we don't really talk enough about COVID and how the destruction of all kind of authority at all. Everybody believing conspiracy, this piece that I'm working on right now about how we're all Alex Jones and how this is the economy we live in. It is much better to just keep saying, well, we don't know. Well, you don't know, and I don't know, and we can never know, and no one can ever know, and nothing is real. You guys this is exactly what James Lindsay and Local Distance, Michael Young, all these guys have been saying. We live in, the postmodernism is the water that we all swim in now. And it has infected the right as well, where, well, nothing is true. And if nothing is true, you can just you don't have to offer any solutions. That is much easier. That's a much easier game to play in entertainment and media, to just be the like, well, I guess we don't know. And that I feel like a boomer. People have been telling me that they're like, oh, you're a boomer now. And I was like, I guess I am. Maybe that's fine. And I'm okay with that. I guess I'm a boomer now. Maybe that's just what happens. We all become boomers as we get older. But I do think that you can be, there's this kind of new pandemic that's around. Not pandemic, but the hantavirus is around. Yeah. And everybody, the automatic default reaction, understandably, again, is, I'm not doing this again. I completely get that. I understand it. But you're literally going to need, there were plagues before. Like 1 out of 4 people died during the Black Plague. And I said this during the plague, the COVID, it wasn't plaguey enough because not enough people around people were getting sick and dying. And it actually wasn't as bad as we were being led to believe to go into lockdowns. But that doesn't mean that plagues that are very bad, where people are going to be bleeding out of all their orifices and dying, don't still exist in the world. And your default shouldn't be like, this isn't real. I'm not doing this.
My least favorite line on the internet, other than anything that ends with "you Jew" or "you stupid Jew."
I get it a lot too. Yeah. I don't even care anymore.
Yeah. I've told people before, like when Nick Fuentes is Führer and they start rounding up the Jews in boxcars, I will be on the boxcar, not because I defended the Jews, because they just all assume I am one.
Yeah.
From reading my comments, how many people said so. But my second least favorite line on the internet is when anybody says, and you will never change my mind. Blah, 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 and you will never... Erica Kirk didn't love her husband, and you'll never change my mind. I'm like, well, okay, then I guess we're done here. Yeah. I guess there's absolutely nowhere to go. there's no such thing as a plague, and you'll never change my mind. First of all, I don't think it's true, because I think when people are bleeding out of their orifices, everyone will
You will
suddenly
change your
remember that they were
mind.
plagues.
Yeah.
But this is the problem with being the boy who cried wolf. You know, I mean, the
Mhm.
governments worldwide, including our own, engaged in the greatest destruction of civil liberties and the greatest transfer of power
And wealth.
and wealth in human history.
Hmm.
And it was falsely premised,
And it was successful.
and it was successful. And so it will be hard now to ever get anyone to trust that again.
Hmm. And that's actually, I think, a healthy immune response to that.
Yeah.
So this is the moment we live in. That was a healthy, liberty-minded response to have, even though, Matt Walsh and many people would argue that actually most people did just go along with it, and they did. And I thought wrongfully
Went along. I would push back only a little bit. People went along with it for a minute. They were
some longer than others.
They were locked down in California. I mean, people were wearing masks in California, and now
I had a baby in 2022 and had to wear a mask
in California.
in California.
Yeah. See, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Most people didn't do that. I mean, I guess California is the most populous state, so I got to be careful with the word most.
Yeah.
But I moved here in 2020 and Broadway was open. November
Yeah.
2020. So, did people agree to 2 weeks to slow the spread? I'm not willing to hold people going along with 2 weeks to slow the spread against them as though everybody falls for the government's lies. Well, no. The default position of a healthy society should be to believe that kind of claim from its government.
Right.
As it revealed itself more and more over the days and weeks and months to be worse and worse, large numbers of people began to see the situation much more honestly and much more truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Yeah, it's terrifying how many people went along with it all the way. 2022 having a baby in California, that's terrifying. Taylor Lorenz today,
Yeah.
right now today, still wears a mask. That's terrifying. But I don't think people going along with it in the earliest days is an indictment. There's also, it's kind of a broader thought that I have, that when people, I think I may have said this in a conversation with Alana Newhouse recently, but we're going through the first period in human history really that isn't driven by war or famine or plague, where birth rates are below replacement.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone's like, well, it's evidence that our society is deeply unhappy and people are deeply unhappy. I think more and more that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think our generation being so slow to have kids actually does mean that. We were presented with novel ideas.
Right.
And the novel ideas, in retrospect, were probably foolish on their face. But they didn't seem foolish on their face in the moment. No one had ever had them before. And so we kind of believed them. Oh, yeah, I am too young to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, it does blunt your opportunities in life if you have kids early. We believed that, and there wasn't a lot of evidence to the contrary yet. It's sort of like I don't feel the same way about communists in the 19-teens as I feel about communists in the 2020s. It's like, well, there's 100 million dead bodies between here and there.
Right.
We should have learned something. But those young, springtime fools or whatever, those sweet summer children of the 19-teens, yeah, they fell in love with a bad idea. They didn't know any better. So we didn't know any better. And
right, it had never been. There had never been, because there hadn't really been birth control. My generation was really the first true generation that was the inheritor of the sexual revolution. My mom's lived through, our parents lived through it, but they still carried the idea that you should get married and have kids.
Right.
And most of them did. And then our generation was the first generation where it was like, well, you don't actually have to.
Right.
And nobody
and what could possibly go wrong?
And we were told also that nobody ever had this choice. Most people had kids because they didn't have a choice whether or not to have kids. And so that, like you said, it was a novel idea. And I remember when everybody was freaking out about population being too much. there was a video that I watched on YouTube, and it was about how the 12 billionth person will never be born. And it was because basically, as everybody gets richer and more wealthy and has better circumstances, they stop having as many kids. Now, I don't know why that is, but I was like, hey, this is a great argument that's backed by a lot of data. And I don't actually think the 12 billionth person will ever be born. And that wasn't that. This was maybe 10 years ago or so that I was watching this video. And now we're like, the population is declining and we're not going to have enough people. So that's changed a lot too, where we went from freaking out that we were going to be overpopulated to basically this video saying what it said is turned out to be true. Yeah. And it's not just in Western culture. You're seeing it in all across the board. And people will argue, oh, this is an animal that's in distress. They're not going to have kids when they're in distress, or it's the, plastics in the semen and everywhere. And
which I think it turns out is just latex gloves. Did you see that story this week?
I saw that. I think it still is in our blood and semen and stuff like that. But I did see that and I was laughing. I'm like, that would be hilarious if it's just because they were using latex gloves.
Yeah. I'm one of the, I don't say this as a boast, just as a statement of fact. I'm one of the earliest people to come out against the entire government reaction to COVID. Mm-hmm. It was like, I don't know, Liz Wheeler, Steve Dace, and me.
And oh my gosh, why am I blanking on his name right now? There's another one, Jesse Kelly. Mm-hmm. Jesse Kelly was like, no. I mean, I remember him and I having DMs, and I ended up being like, I apologize, you were right. I had no idea.
But even so, I have a lot of sympathy for anyone who was falling for it, and also I could have been wrong. In those earliest days, it broke my way in terms of what I thought it all was. But I do have sympathy for people who fall in love with bad ideas early compared to people who hang on to bad ideas late. Like, you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to admit when you're wrong. You have to be able to question the lessons that you take from one circumstance into the next circumstance. I went through quite a trauma over the last year in my professional and personal life. And it's very hard to trust yourself to learn any lessons when you go through something really profound, because it's not necessarily the case that the lessons that you will most quickly grab onto are the actual lessons that you can be wrong about your conclusions in reaction to your own, or in response to your own life and circumstances, and then you carry those bad. And so I think this, your point about future plagues is sort of one of them.
Yeah.
Like, be careful which lesson you learn. There are very important lessons to be learned from COVID. By the way, I'm worried that we're not learning them. No one's really been punished for
at
COVID.
All.
And in part because Donald Trump was the Republican nominee in 2024, they can't. Because the president who presided over
the
shutdowns became the opposition party's nominee.
Right.
And in order to square that circle, there's a lot to recommend Donald Trump. But I said from the beginning, I thought he should be disqualified because of COVID. He wasn't, obviously. Right. And because he wasn't, I voted for him. And again, I quite often on this show extol the virtues of Trump's second term. I'm happy that he's the president under the circumstances. But I, as a sort of fundamental view, believe that everyone who presided over the shutdowns of 2020 should have been disqualified from government. I believe that everyone who pushed for mandating the vaccine during the Biden term should be disqualified from government. They're not.
Yeah.
They're all going to serve in the next Democrat administration. We are not going to punish COVID, though. That is the lesson.
Yeah.
The lesson is we will not punish this. And that's an enormous failure for something that obviously broke the world, broke our economy, broke our culture, broke Gen Z.
Broke our brains.
Mm-hmm. We're still dealing with the consequence of it. I think we'll spend the rest of our lives dealing with the consequences of it because, as it turns out, you can't shut down the world and then just turn it back on. It doesn't work.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's crazy that we lived through it. And I feel like only now even in the project I'm working on's book and I'm writing, there is some stuff about that in it. And I have to take breaks from it because I get so mad. I understand why people would want to just, eternally sunshine their spotless mind of all of it, because it was, when you really do look at it, it is enraging. But I actually think now that there's a little distance in time, and it's not so raw, we need to really look at that so that we don't make those mistakes again. It's interesting you talk about, trusting yourself. My husband and I talk about this a lot. I feel like because I was an addict and I lied to myself about a lot of things, there's always a part of me that doesn't fully trust myself. I think it's improved over decades of sobriety. I know I have an internal compass, and I have actual kind of physical alerts that go off. Like if somebody is, I used to think I just had free floating anxiety, and I often did when I was hungover or when I was smoking too much weed or whatever. And now I get anxiety when I'm lying to myself or someone's lying to me. So I've learned, but again, this is time, and this is stuff they talk about even in 12-step, like that intuition, you start to trust it again, because you break so many promises, not just to the people around you that you love, but to yourself, that I'm always slightly skeptical of what I'm believing and why I'm believing it. And I'm always highly aware of my own ability to lie to myself. And when you mix that up with analytics, algorithms, audience capture, it become, and I can't even imagine when you add fame to that on top of it, I don't know how you would kind of stay sane or grounded other than religion, other than having some kind of practice. When you say, you haven't been able to trust that you can learn new lessons, what do you mean by that? I'm not sure I fully understand.
Well, I'm just not sure that in the process, the first lessons that I thought might be the lessons, I don't think are the lessons.
Right.
And in fact, I think that a lot of them are defenses to protect yourself from future pain, which is usually a lie.
Right.
That's usually a
rejection and resentment and
Right. And it's very easy to build a sort of faux wisdom around pain and pain avoidance and incubation of resistance of resentment, and to call those lessons and even share those as lessons with other people as though you're communicating great wisdom to them for how they should live their lives. And, I'm not a recovering addict. I don't have whatever that is. There are many addicts in my family. And, I've never done an illicit drug. It's the least boomer thing about me, obviously. But, they gave us red ribbons in school and said, just say no.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, makes sense to me. So I've never done an illicit drug. But I know that if we partook of some illicit drug on my fetching coffee table, that while I might develop a habit if I did it routinely, of course, if I did a line of Coke or something, I wouldn't suddenly be addicted to it.
Right.
I don't have that thing.
Right.
I know that I have uncles who, if they walked into a room never having done a drug in their life and there was like tomato sauce on this table, they would be addicted to tomato sauce because they've got the thing,
it's something.
Whatever the thing is that predisposes them toward addiction. And so I say this as someone who hasn't been through that process, and yet I would react to this in the same way, which is I don't always trust myself. I actually think you're probably not supposed to trust yourself too much. You're the first liar in your life. And my sort of religious view, my view of the gospel, is sort of premised on the idea that we're the problem. Like in most situations, the problem is us. Doesn't mean you're never the actual victim of things.
Right.
You're quite often very truly the victim of things. But even then, your first instinct when you are truly the victim of something is going to be to lie to yourself.
Right.
Your first instinct when you're actually the victim of something is going to try to be to protect yourself or to gain, to find a way to gain in the circumstance.
So true.
So I just think being self-critical or self-questioning at a minimum is almost like the most important skill to cultivate in life. But you do have to will it, especially in times of actual loss or actual pain or actual failure.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking right now about how even in early recovery, I would have using dreams. And even later on in recovery, 5 years later, I would have dreams where I used or drank. And I would lie in my dream. I was lying to people in my dream that I didn't use. And I remember waking up and being like, okay, using dreams are never fun. They're always upsetting or disturbing. But the more interesting thing to me was that I would my deep unconscious nature is to lie about it even in my dream. That was always crazy to me that was like my instinct in that moment.
How much did you lie to yourself through the whole process?
I mean, I think this goes back to the regret piece, that the something that because you don't, this is something I've been, again, contemplating about, and I really should write a book around that piece because it's much bigger than just that piece. And even the reaction to it, people being so mad at me for expressing regret, having a culture that's so it's such a like YOLO, culture that they were really offended that they're like, oh, you lived your life, blah, blah, blah. But you don't know if something is cope until it's not cope. It's like you don't know. I didn't know that I would love being a mom the way that I love being a mom. And you cannot know that. You can't know what you don't know. And this is what we're robbing particularly young women of, because I feel like they're only hearing one side of this. Yes. And it came so much more naturally than I thought it would come. And there's always like mommy shaming tweets going around on X, and I try not to engage in any of the mommy wars because I think it's very individual. And somebody was worried about their looks and their body. And I'm like, trust me, when you get pregnant, you're not even going to, unless you're like a narcissistic sociopath, you're not going to even be, that is not going to be your primary concern. Your primary concern is going to be, is this little being okay? And then that's always going to be your primary concern at all times, forever. And that there were just so many things that I didn't know. And I can look now back and say, oh, so much of this was just cope. So much of what I was saying was just me coping with the fact that and this is sometimes where the trolls are right. I've joked about this. I'm like, sometimes the trolls are right. And that's when it really gets uncomfortable. They're like, oh, I bet her stepdad. I'm like, oh, you're right about some of these things. They would say this is just cope from an aging woman. And I would get this when I was like 35. Oh, this is just someone whose ovaries are dried up and she's just coping that she can't have kids. Now, do I think that if I hadn't had kids, I would be some miserable person who would be angry and dried up and whatever? I don't think that's that caricature that people on the right create is not fair or accurate. Do I realize now that a lot of the stuff that I was telling myself and the world at that time was me trying to cope with something that I didn't understand? Also true. Yeah. And had I never had a child, I never would have known that. Had I never gotten sober, I never would have known how many lies I told myself until I probably died. And I'm lucky I didn't die before I got sober. So that's a very fascinating thing that I've been contemplating a lot, is that you're lucky if you live long enough or have an experience that allows you to look at the ways in which you are coping, because not everybody gets that opportunity. And that's the only place where you're going to have to deeply confront the ways in which you lied to yourself and hopefully get some wisdom and grow, or recognize that you need a new tool. Or there are just things that I know about myself now, like resentment is very bad for me. It's bad for everyone. We live in a resentment culture. It's everywhere. Everybody's complaining all the time. And I have to try and stay out of resentment because it will poison me. And in media, I've had to grapple with that. People I thought were friends were not friends. People I've been asking myself the question, can you even have friends in media? It seems like that's a very weird thing. And mistaking opportunism as friendship, all of these things have created a lot of resentment that I'm currently having to go through and deal with and let it free. It is that it's so toxic. Resentment is so toxic. It is truly taking poison and hoping the other person dies.
Yeah.
It's just, it will hurt your whole life, your whole worldview. And it's so good you keep talking about agency, because it is everywhere in our culture now. It's just a resentment culture, and we have so much. I get on the plane and I'm like, this is still mind-blowing to me. It's mind-blowing.
No, I had that exact experience. I flew to Texas this week to appear on Allie Beth Stuckey's show.
I love her.
It was a wonderful time and a fun conversation. And while I was there, because I'm from Texas, that's the homeland, I saw some family, and I went and saw one of my dear friends from growing up, I would say from high school, because that's like the way of saying it, but I'm from a small town. So what I mean is from zero through leaving home.
Right.
One of my friends from life.
From life.
And I was supposed to meet her at a restaurant, and she texted me and said, "Hey, kids' Little League game is running long." Sent me the address, said, come here if you're able. So I did. And I'm sitting at this Little League game, and it just struck me how strange the times in which we live are.
Mm-hmm.
I woke up that morning in my bed in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And now I'm sitting at a Little League game watching one of my dear friend's children swing a bat.
Yep.
And in a few hours, I'm going to lay back down in my bed in Tennessee.
Yeah.
That's never been possible in all of human history, and we treat it like it's normal.
I know.
There's nothing normal. Like, I might as well have been like Dorothy.
Yeah.
I'm in the magical land of Oz. Everything here is in color, and in a few minutes' time, I'm going to be back in black and white world with Auntie M or whatever. And yet we're resentful. Like, what on earth? We live in a time of absolute magic, absolute wonders, and we have no grace for each other. We can't admit regret, to your point. And if you can't allow people to have regret, then you also can't have grace for people.
Oh, that's interesting.
Those two things are completely coupled.
That never occurred to me until right now. That's really true, though.
And in which resentment and victimhood are like coins of the realm.
But it's like crack. It's just easy. It's so much easier. It is like you said, there's a book I read with my daughter all the time, and it's just teaching her, scope of like, it's all about how her room is, it's like, here's your room. Okay, where your room is in your house. Let's draw a map of the house. Now let's draw a map of your street. And it zooms out to the globe. And so it helps her understand, like, there's a world, there's, countries, there's a state, and then there's a town within the state, and then there's a road. And and you were talking in your amazing monologue about agency, about how Jordan Peterson, that very powerful clean your room. And I was thinking about how this is also very 12-step. When I got sober, I felt like I was in preschool. It was like opposite day. I think people don't know where to start when they feel overwhelmed, and they don't know, their life feels like they're spiraling out. And it is as simple as, you can clean your room. You can do that. When I got sober, it was everything you want to do, don't do. Everything you don't want to do, you should probably do. And that was really just how I started to parse what I should and should not be doing. The other thing that they said to me in early sobriety that really stuck with me is, because I had no self-esteem at all. And I know that self-esteem doesn't matter and blah, blah, blah. We probably place too much emphasis on it, but I think you need to have a certain amount of self-respect and self-love and regard. And my sponsor at the time said, if you want self-esteem, do esteemable acts. And it was so simple. It was that simple. don't sleep with the married guy, Bridget. If you want to be somebody who respects yourself, do something. Don't do those things that are going to make you feel bad about yourself, along with drinking and doing drugs and all. And I think when you come in to get sober, or you've gone through something traumatic or whatever, there's so much shame that comes with that. Even if it's in my instance, let's say when I was drugged and raped when I was 17, that I was a victim, but there was so much shame. And one of the things that they do in 12-step is you do a 4th step where you write. A lot of people find this very controversial. You write down everything that you have resentments for. Basically, it's an inventory, and it can be people, places, things, institutions, anything. And they will tell you, and this is where it gets controversial, to even put somebody who victimized you on there. But it's because you are still. It's not necessarily that you weren't a victim and you have no right to be mad at them and have all these feelings, but what are the ways in which you're still reacting to that are harmful to you? Because the most important column in this little exercise you do is, what is my part? What is my part? Always coming back to what is my part. And this was one of the things that when I find myself in resentment, I have to go through this list of, okay, well, what is the fear that's coming up? Because usually it's economic insecurity, my personal standing, the way that I'm perceived. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's something in your sex relations, whatever. So they look at these very basic instincts that you might have and what that resentment might be affecting. And it's always what did they do, or what did you perceive that they did? Which was always an interesting way of framing it. And then always at the end, what is my part? And that was doing that inventory was so life-changing for me. And I still do it because it is that resentment of okay, maybe this person wronged me. They did. They wronged me. They did something. They betrayed me, whatever. But what was my part in that? And how is that still playing out in my life now? And the minute you start looking at those little things and grappling, you start taking that victim mentality, because it sneaks in to all of our lives all the time. When you're in traffic and you're mad and you feel oh, this person, they're doing this and they're doing that. Well, maybe you didn't leave in time. Maybe you didn't give yourself enough time to leave, and you're mad at the guy that they're slowed down, or it's an old person or whatever, and you're going to blame them because they're driving like an idiot, and they are driving like an idiot, but you should have given yourself more time. And it's actually crazy when you really start looking at how quickly and easily it is to just go to that victim mentality in your day-to-day life. And it's so insidious, and it is easy to do in relationships and marriages. It's crazy. It's always creeping.
Yeah, I've always known that this is a real problem for people in marriage. My life has put me in a strange position of counseling a lot of people into marriage and a few people out of marriage. And I always tell people in premarital counseling that you can't go tit for tat with your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
You can't store up little resentments and save them for later so that you can break them out as a defense mechanism when your spouse criticizes you.
Right.
Because if your spouse is going to live a life with you, they are going to criticize you. They have the right to criticize you. And what people like to do is they store up little tiny resentments, and they don't even feel the resentment. They go, oh, there's a little thing. I could feel that resentment, but I'm not going to feel it. I'm going to wrap it up in a little wrapper, and I'm going to put it in my pocket, and I'm going to wait until you have some valid criticism of me, and then I'm going to break this out.
Right.
So you're going to say, my wife is going to say, hey, you said you're going to take out the trash and you didn't. Well, you said you were going to do the dishes last week and didn't, or whatever.
Right.
That's a silly, superficial example. You weren't able to criticize me because I criticized you instead.
Right.
And now we're going tit for tat with one another, and no legitimate response to criticism is going to happen. So truly early in my marriage, my wife and I would say this to each other, if you tried to do that, I would go, you don't have the right to bring that up. What you brought up may be way worse than what I brought up. But if I say you were supposed to take out the trash and you did, or you said you would take out the trash and you didn't, and you bring up something that's wrong with me, You could bring up, you slept with my sister, which we would both agree is worse.
Yeah.
But you have no right to bring that up. Like, well, you've been sitting on the I slept with your sister card. That's been saving that one for the rainy day of not having to face any legitimate criticism of yourself. And so it was kind of a funny little thing that we would do early in our marriage, is actually say to each other, like, nah, if you've got a problem, you actually have an obligation to bring it up in a timely manner and not as a reaction to someone else's criticism of you, because that just becomes now unresolvable, unreconcilable resentment between a husband and a wife. There's nothing gets solved in that conversation. And therefore now it's just now we just have a permanent state of, you didn't do the dishes and I didn't take out the trash. Like, and all the damage we're going to do to each other as we battle over it.
I feel this in friendships too. It's definitely, I mean, I think of, again, going back to like some of these media relationships where I look at my part and it's like, well, I should have said something. I just didn't say anything, because I had another friend in a certain situation who was like, well, they did that to you because they could. And so that gave, which is also, two things can be true at once. That could be true. They did that to me because they could, but I still didn't say anything, and then I let it fester. And my husband, being married to a therapist, is always, he doesn't therapize me. But when I ask him, I will sometimes say, why am I hanging on to this? And he has a great question that I think about all the time now. It's become, one of those just mental tools. Well, you must be getting something out of it. So what are you getting out of it? Are you feeling better about yourself? Does it allow you to feel superior? Does it allow you to feel like a victim? And that one is not comfortable, but it gets to the heart of it pretty quick. Usually when you are suffering, a lot of people will say, oh, it's because this, that, the other thing. And if you're trying to change your life and it's not changing, well, you might be getting something out of that. And it might be negative. That doesn't mean that you're not getting something out of that. And it's been, I think this is the kind of stuff that allows me to, stay somewhat centered and grounded and in this crazy moment, because I think in many ways, take the personal and kind of blow it out to our cultural, as you were saying, the culture is just all of us individuals. I think we need to like go into recovery. People, we've been through something. Maybe we already hit rock bottom. People keep saying, oh, it's going to get worse, so it's going to be rock bottom. I don't know that it needs to.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. I don't know that it needs to. It can always get much worse. I'm always hyper aware of that. Just anyone who's studied history knows that people kept thinking things are going to get better as they continually got worse. And I don't know that we need to learn that lesson, but I do think we need to, okay, COVID was bad. We lost trust in all of our institutions. People in media lied. Some people were right. Some people were wrong. How do we maintain some skepticism and be grounded in truth? Who do we turn to for our information? How do we process information? And as I always say, and now AI has entered the chat, I think that this is the kind of stuff that people like you and me and people in our space should really be spending our time trying to give people solutions for, or also just myself. I mean, how do you process the news and media now?
Certainly differently. You brought up early in the conversation that people are just sort of turning it off or tuning out. And it is interesting. I read less news now than at any time in my adult life.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of it. Like I'm not doing it on purpose, but I'm conscious of the fact that I'm doing it. That it's harder to be informed.
Right.
In part because there's so much information, in part because I don't trust so many of the people synthesizing the information into narratives. The narratives themselves are a thing that I'm very skeptical of.
It's crazy.
left and right.
It's really bad right now.
It's really bad.
Yeah.
The AI of it hasn't bothered me at the same level that it's bothering you. I bristle at the obvious reliance on AI among communicators. And I think it's great for communicators to avail themselves of AI. It's a wonderful tool if it's used as a tool wonderfully. But when I read just some AI slop on my X feed, it makes me crazy.
I know.
It makes me crazy.
That's the other thing. I see it everywhere now. And I mean, maybe it's good. I've just tuned out.
Yeah. And even if it's accurate, it's not even that I'm worried that it's hallucinating, although you're always a little worried about that. But it's just so unhuman.
Yeah.
I feel manipulated when I read it.
Yeah.
I feel, if you go into Chat GPT and just say, hey, write me a piece about Iran, and then you tweet that at me, I feel manipulated when I read it because it's trying to manipulate me. It's trying to create engagement.
Yeah.
I want to be lied to a little better than that. I don't want to.
Right. Right before we were talking, I was waiting and the guy Husk who does those videos that I'm like, how does he keep getting away with this? But it is like, why are we so worried about this? It doesn't seem like it really knows how to do. I think my issue with AI is that it's the slop that just makes people tune out. But
yeah,
when it comes to images and video and not knowing whether that was something that I don't think we fully processed, how not knowing that something on video is real, not knowing if an image is real, how much that has probably unseated people's when they're looking at something online. You always had at least and again, people will push back and go, well, the moon landing was faked or whatever. But you will always, you had some trust that what you were looking at was real.
Well, let me even jump on that. Everybody knew the moon landing was real.
Not everyone.
Virtually everyone knew that the moon landing was real.
Then.
Yes.
Okay.
That's my point. This idea that the moon landing is fake has just increased, and now everybody thinks the moon landing was fake, which is absurd, absolutely absurd. But yeah, the fact that we can't trust what we see now makes us also not trust what we saw then. That's an interesting. That's an interesting fact, that we actually take the bias of what's normal now and we project it backwards into a past. I think a lot of conspiracies live on our ability to do that, or not ability, but like on our tendency as humans.
But it's also this whole idea that like the post-war consensus isn't true.
Right.
So it's not just happening with the moon landing, it's happening with all of history as we know it. So something is fundamentally, and people will say, no, this is good. The truth is going to be revealed. But nobody has been able to tell me what that truth is yet. Yeah. And it does seem like people are tuning out, and I think it's probably good. It's a coping mechanism because they don't know what's real and they don't want to have to figure out if it is or not. And people have a very real aversion to looking dumb. And so they're not going to want to share something with their friend that their friend goes and shares. And then somebody says, oh, that's fake, idiot. That's not real. So people are just going to stop. They're just going to stop. They're going to tune out. And again, my question is, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's the correct reaction to have to this.
To take in less. And if you take in less, you'll be less manipulated. I think that there is something to it. We've been drinking directly out of the fire hose basically since 2010.
Yeah.
Really, since 2010. And it's too much.
Yeah.
It's too much. I read a study this morning that said if you turn off social media for 2 weeks, adults turn off social media for 2 weeks, they see a marked improvement in attention and happiness.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, there is. We do need to turn it off to some degree. And listen, that's not to say it doesn't do a lot of really good things, but it's not regulated. It's dysregulated at the moment.
It's funny though. I never listened to podcasts, and I just started. So I'm going like in the total opposite direction because I love Ben Sass's podcast. I've been getting a lot out of that. I never really listened. Through all of this time of making podcasts and everything, I just haven't really. You don't have time to take in the amount of content when you're putting out.
I've never listened to podcasts.
And then I started listening to yours, and
you should listen every day.
I do every single one. But it was something, there's both of these things, and I was reflecting on this coming here today. I was really excited to be able to do this. There's something refreshing about these two podcasts, and it's because they're giving me something spiritual fortitude to deal with this moment because I'm in media. And I don't want to, as much as we're like dumpster fire and we're always, it's a comedy show and whatever. I'm always like, is that true or not? Is that true or not? I want these things to be accurate as much as I can figure them out, because otherwise I think it undermines the joke, A, but B, I don't want to necessarily mislead my audience just for a joke either. That feels slimy to me. And I see a lot in comedy right now of nihilism, and it is toxic and poisonous, and it's so easy and cheap to be like, it's all, and we do this on Dumpster Fire too. We're like, it's all coming off the rails, but I don't want people to feel like it's hopeless. And I think, and again, nihilism was another thing that I really had to become aware of in recovery, because that train station ends with, well, what's it all for? And it's empty and meaningless. So I can't, there are just certain things I can't afford. And nihilism's one of them, resentment, another one. And I see it kind of everywhere. This, oh, it's all, you're owed a house. Like, this whole idea that you were owed a house is so ridiculous to me. Yes, housing prices are expensive. Yes, we need to loosen regulations so we can build more in some of these places. But I didn't grow up feeling like America owed me a house. I was a freelance writer. When I got sober and at 35 years old, I was waiting tables until I was the last table I waited was in 2019. That was not long ago. I didn't have any retirement. I had to build my life all over again from scratch. I felt like an enormous loser, but I didn't feel like...
I just realized that you took advantage of me the first time we met.
Why?
You were still waiting tables when we met.
Yeah.
And we met at a conference, in person at a conference. And my first impression of you is that you were like, obviously very winsome, but in a very self-confident way. Like, you exuded a kind of confidence, like there was no room that wasn't your room, which is a very powerful trait. And you sort of invited yourself to go to lunch with all of us after this thing. And I said something, we weren't even going to have lunch. Like, I think we were going to head back to the office or something after this conference. So you're like, all right, guys, where are we having lunch? And I thought, well, yeah, we should do that. It'd be fun. And I said, well, there's all these little restaurants right here. And you said, no, I'm way too bougie for that. You got to take me to the Palm. And I think that's what we did. We walked to the Palm or something and had a $500 lunch or something stupid. And but it was all a lie. You weren't bougie.
I'm still bougie.
You're a little bougie. Yeah.
Well, being a waitress, when I would wait tables in Rhode Island, it was like the way we treated ourselves. Mm-hmm. So when you wait tables, you know what good wine is, what good champagne is, what good meat is. Like, I worked in fine dining. So on our days off, we would go and pretend we were bougie and go get champagne and oysters and like spend money that we probably shouldn't have been spending that way. But it was a way to just treat ourselves after being on your feet for like 12 hours a day, day after day.
Well, that's my first interaction with you, is thinking that you had this powerful personality and that you would open lots of doors. And I immediately after that started reading your work and realized that you were an excellent thinker and a great writer. And I've watched you go through some of this transformation over time from afar. We're not close friends, but I consider you a friend in our space, and watched you get married, watched you have a child, watched how the things that you talk about, you always wrote about deep issues, I think, even when you were writing kind of in your other life, but you wrote about them with maybe less moral seriousness than you've cultivated in this new chapter of your life. In some ways, maybe you were rejecting moral seriousness in your previous chapter, and now you've attained to a kind of moral seriousness, which it shouldn't be confused with piety. It's
Right.
not. As that evolution has happened, and as the things that have brought you through that evolution, sobriety, 12-step program from which you still derive wisdom, having your eyes open to, by Ben Shapiro, to even the idea of values as a motivating.
They're a thing.
They're a thing. And they should motivate my choices and behaviors. Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And then getting married to a man who marriage helps everyone. Marrying someone who helps people, I'm sure also, especially, is helpful, even though he doesn't therapize. Therapize? Is that the word?
It's a word I made up, but
I liked it when you
should be
used
a
it.
word.
Yeah. Even though he doesn't do that, I'm sure that it's in his nature to have helped you to continue to grow as a person, as any spouse should, but especially him. You talk about how you wouldn't even know what you don't know if you didn't have a kid. Andrew Clavin, I think, is the one who said that one of God's great graces is that he doesn't let people without children know what they're missing.
Yeah.
It's just an actual just gift that he gives to people without kids. They don't know. Has that evolved into new spiritual awareness as well?
Yes, I think it started with sobriety, though, because I had such a resistance. I'm a cradle Catholic. So I was very much like the joke in the rooms is like, oh, I'm a recovering Catholic. And you always get a big laugh because there's many of us. Yeah. And also there's a lot of just Irish Catholic alcoholics. And and I was very much, I couldn't even listen to the Lord's Prayer at all when I was in the rooms. It just made me flinch. I was like, religion. I went through a very, I would say agnostic. I was never atheist. I read a lot of the new atheists. I went through that whole phase in my 20s. I read Sam Harris. I loved him. And I read The End of Faith. I thought it was really well done and made a lot of sense. I found atheists to be preachy in their own way. So I think I was like, well, I'm not arrogant enough to know that there's nothing. You know? Yeah. I was just more like, maybe, okay, I don't know if there is or isn't. I leave room. And then I got sober and I had to it was a resentment. So I had to look at it. My sponsor, for people who don't know, a sponsor is just someone who works the 12 steps with you. And she was just amazing. I got very lucky. And she said, read Emmet Fox. He was kind of like one of the godfathers of New Age, which I didn't know. And these guys were around when AA was forming and they were speaking. And he wrote about how the Lord's Prayer, line by line, why it has maintained its staying power. And he wrote about it in a way that allowed me to say, wow, that actually almost look at it like poetry. But the deeper kind of spiritual meaning of every single line, of why that resonates with people and why it's so powerful. And it fundamentally reframed my relationship to the prayer, almost like I was struck kind of spiritually with a newfound love of it. And so I went from flinching to every time I hearing it to really loving it. And then now I'm not religion shopping. I'm such a Catholic. There are certain things that I just do. Ash Wednesday, I go get ashes. I did it when I was living in LA. I did it. My aunt and I kind of started going to church again together when we were there before I even moved here. And here being Texas, not here. And now I feel we pray before we put my daughter in a preschool, and she would come home and say these little prayers that they said at lunch. And my husband wasn't raised religious at all, but we started praying before dinner. my husband and I, before we even had my daughter, we would, we say the third step prayer, which is a prayer in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's this great line, relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. And he had that print like made on wood for me, the relieve me of the bondage of self. And we always joke when I got pregnant, I was like, well, he's relieving us of the bondage of self. And he's like, I meant so we could like meditate more. And I meant more time to like work out. And we say that every morning and have since we got back together. And now I'm trying to say nighttime prayers, with her, just to, even if it's just like, we do a little gratitude journal. So am I going to church every Sunday yet? No. Do I want to raise my daughter to, it's like my husband said this to me. We talk about God and all this stuff all the time. It doesn't matter if I believe it's true or not. What version of me is better? Is the version of me that believes that there is a God and follows some of those basic spiritual truths and practices, like saying a prayer before a meal and saying a prayer first thing when you wake up, and allowing that spirit to kind of move through me. Is that a better version of me than the version that does not have that? Yes. So I want to get into the intellectualizing of it. I don't, and so much of faith is just that. I think that, I feel like it's, I think that definitely, and then I've had some experiences that I'm not talking about publicly yet, but I've had insanely spiritual kind of like, okay, God, like, I don't, okay, I believe in you. And I've had so many. Allie Beth Stuckey, when I went on her podcast, actually, I told her my whole story of how I met my husband, how I got pregnant, even just the story of how they told me I couldn't have kids. And then my husband and I surrendered and said, it's fine. We'll be like the cool aunt and uncle. And while we sat on that beach and just came to terms with the fact that we weren't going to try, I didn't want to go through IVF and all of that. I was pregnant. And I was sitting there talking to her pregnant, and she said, I would say that you are evidence, your whole story is evidence of, God working through you. And I wasn't quite there yet, although I think maybe that was 5 years ago. I think more and more, it really does ground me. I look at things like how people can get through the most horrific things imaginable. We had those floods in Texas, which I was, sometimes there's a news story that I'm like, I can't turn away from it, even though I know I should, but it's just me trying to imagine like what those parents are going through and the nightmare that never ends. And I grew up, I lost a lot of friends very young. So I went to a lot of young kids' funerals very young and saw parents lose their kids, to the point that by the time that I was 21, I said, I'm never going to a young person's funeral again. And I also never want to have kids. It was like it was fundamental, because when I really asked myself why I never wanted kids for a long time, there was feminism, this, that, but really it was fear. I just was like, I can't imagine. I still can't. No parent can. It is the most horrific nightmare. I cannot. And that fear, and seeing it as a young formative teenager, and then seeing the parents, it really stuck with me. And I listen to some of these parents in the aftermath, and it is their faith that has gotten them through this thing that I don't know how you would get through it. And faith is kind of what got me through early sobriety, at moments when I really wanted to go out and drink or use drugs. And I felt like I couldn't be a person who got sober just to be, I just couldn't make my life about not doing something. It had to be, okay, well, who am I without this stuff, since I've been doing it since I was 12? And what does my life look like without it for many year after year stacked? And what do I have to give? It is a miracle. I mean, when you have a kid and you're studying, like, we were studying, what was the other, she's obsessed with science and science books and the human body. And so she's like obsessed with blood and the way the body works. And so I'm reading these books. I'm like, this is all insane. It is a miracle. How dare I take that for granted? And how dare I get in the way of what? That's where I feel like the creative force comes from. I think so much of my self-destruction was just me not being creative, and it turned inward on me and I started self-destructing. I think if you don't use those gifts and that stuff that you want to put out into the world, you will turn on yourself. And one of the things that I find so toxic and horrible is that people have, everybody's listening to this podcast and this has all become like a cheat code to be a personality. Mm-hmm. And it's not. Yeah. It's so shallow. It's not. You're just listening to true crimes, but it's for dudes. Or it's not like this isn't. I always think of another person who's really influential in my early sobriety, and he said, "How you doing?" And it was early sobriety, and I was like, "I'm all right." Well, I was very thinking about how much of a loser I felt like, and he was like, "How's everyone around you doing?" And that question that's true for anyone. You don't have to be sober to ask yourself, "How's everyone around me doing?" Yeah, and that is. I think that's how my spirituality is like, it's unfolding, but it's not organized. I feel like it's very much like me. It's a very scattered. I feel deeply that there is God, and I feel that spirit is working through me. And there are things that I cannot explain that are miracles and just coincidences and things that have to me mean there's a much bigger force at work. But I don't go to an organized church. I don't have I'm not like, I'm a Christian that goes to this church yet.
Yeah.
Yet
sounds good. What does Bridget want to be remembered for?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, really just being a good mom. I mean, that's like somebody who I try to show up for people. I really I want to be remembered for, it's so funny. Like, they tell you in early sobriety that all the things you thought you wanted, you won't necessarily want anymore. And that I'm still very ambitious. Yeah. But because I want resources to make my shows, because those shows are about the mother-daughter relationship, and I have God infused in them, and I have science versus, it's all of these themes that I want to explore. What I want to be, sure, if you remember me for my work, great. But really, it's all so short and fleeting. If my daughter remembers me as a good mom, I won.
Wouldn't that be fun to go back in time and tell 25-year-old Bridget?
She would laugh in your face and tell you to give her whatever drugs you were on.
Well, God uses explorers too, so keep exploring.
Yeah.
And thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.